The alarm screamed through the tunnels like a dying animal, and Marcus Chen dropped his tools and looked up at the ceiling 3 kilometers above his head, where the rest of the colony lived their safe and comfortable lives. He had been working alone in Processing Sector 7 for 6 hours already, and his back hurt, and his eyes burned from the dust and the dim orange light that made everything look like it was covered in rust. The ground shook, and Marcus grabbed the railing next to him and watched as the massive ore crusher ahead of him tilted to one side like a drunk man trying to stand up straight. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted into his communicator, but all he heard was static and crackling noise, and then silence. The second tremor was worse than the first, and Marcus felt the metal walkway beneath his feet twist and buckle, and he started running toward the emergency exit 200 meters away. He could hear the machines around him groaning, screaming as their supports gave way, and massive gears the size of houses began to fall from their mountings and crash into the floor below. Marcus was fast, but not fast enough. The conveyor assembly above him snapped free from its brackets and came down on him like the hand of an angry god, and he felt his legs crumple beneath the weight, and his right arm got caught in a tangle of rotating gears that pulled and twisted at his flesh. He screamed, but no one could hear him down here in the belly of the machine. When the shaking finally stopped and the dust began to settle, Marcus opened his eyes and tried to understand what had happened to him. He was lying on his back on a pile of broken metal and crushed rock, and he could see the ceiling far above him through a gap in the wreckage. His legs were pinned beneath a conveyor belt assembly that must have weighed several tons, and no matter how hard he pushed, he could not move it even a single centimeter. Right arm was worse, because it was caught inside a gear mechanism that was still slowly turning, and every few seconds he felt the teeth bite into his skin and pull at his muscles. The pain was beyond anything he had ever experienced, and he had to bite down on his own tongue to stop himself from screaming again. "Okay, Marcus," he said to himself in a voice that shook with fear and pain. "Think about this carefully and figure out what to do." He reached for his communicator with his left hand and pulled it from his belt and looked at the screen and saw that it was cracked and dark and completely dead. The emergency beacon on his suit was also broken, because he could see the shattered casing hanging from his chest like a useless piece of jewelry. He was alone. He was trapped, and nobody knew where he was. The machines around him continued to operate, because they did not care that a human being was dying in their midst. Gears and pumping hydraulics filled the air with a constant mechanical heartbeat. Marcus looked around and tried to find something, anything, that could help him escape from this metal tomb. The walkway he had been standing on was now twisted into a ramp that led down into darkness, and sparks flew from broken wires that hung from the ceiling like electric vines. He could see a small service drone lying nearby, and its body was crushed, but its single eye still glowed with a faint blue light. "Hey," Marcus shouted at the drone, "can you send a message?" The drone made a soft whirring sound, and its eye turned to look at him. But it did not move, and it did not speak. "Great," Marcus said with a bitter laugh. "My only company is a brain-damaged robot that cannot do anything but stare at me." He tried again to free his legs, but the conveyor assembly did not budge, and the effort sent waves of agony through his body that made him gasp and cry out. The gear mechanism holding his arm turned again, and he felt something tear inside his shoulder, and hot blood ran down his side and pooled beneath him on the cold metal floor. "Help!" he screamed into the darkness. "Somebody help me, please!" But the only answer was the endless grinding of machines and the distant rumble of unstable rock. Hours passed, and Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time he woke up, the pain was worse and his hope was smaller. He thought about his sister back on Earth, and how they had fought before he left, and how he had told her he never wanted to see her again. He thought about his mother, who had died 3 years ago, and how he had not been there to hold her hand, because he was too busy chasing money on distant moons. He thought about all the things he had wanted to do with his life, and all the dreams he had thrown away for a job that paid well, but gave him nothing but loneliness and regret. "I am going to die here," he said to the broken drone that still watched him with its unblinking blue eye. "I am going to die alone in the dark, surrounded by machines that do not even know I exist." The drone whirred again, and Marcus could almost imagine that it was trying to comfort him. "You know what is funny?" he said to his mechanical companion. "I came to the edge of space because I wanted to be special, and I wanted to matter, and I wanted to do something that would make people remember me." He laughed, and the sound turned into a cough that brought blood to his lips. "Instead, I am going to be forgotten, and my body will be crushed into ore and processed into metal, and shipped off to some factory where they will turn me into spare parts for machines, just like these ones." The temperature was dropping, and Marcus could see his breath forming clouds in the cold air, and he knew that hypothermia would kill him if the blood loss did not get him first. He closed his eyes and listened to the rhythm of the machines around him, and for a moment he could almost pretend that it was music. "I will be like this forever," he whispered into the darkness, trapped and alone and forgotten. But somewhere deep inside his chest, beneath the pain and the fear and the despair, there was a small spark of something that refused to die. It was the same spark that had driven his ancestors to cross oceans and climb mountains and reach for the stars. It was the thing that made humans different from the machines that surrounded. It was hope. And even though Marcus did not know it yet, that tiny spark was about to change everything. The blue light from the drone's eye was the only thing that kept Marcus company through the long hours of darkness and pain. He had named it Kappa because that was what it said on the side of its crushed metal body, and talking to Kappa was better than talking to himself, even though the drone could not answer back. "Let me tell you a story," Marcus said through cracked and bleeding lips. "Let me tell you about where I come from." The drone whirred, and its eye focused on his face. Marcus smiled despite the agony that burned through every part of his body. "I grew up on Earth, in a place called New Carolina, where the ocean used to be before they built the walls and pushed the water back." He paused to catch his breath, because even speaking was becoming difficult now. "My grandfather helped build those walls, and he used to tell me that humans could do anything if we refused to give up. And I thought he was just a crazy old man, with too many." The machines around him continued their endless work, and somewhere in the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of drilling and crushing, as the automated systems processed ore that would never reach its destination. "I had a sister named Maya, and she was smarter than me and prettier than me, and everyone loved her more than they loved me." He laughed, but the sound was hollow and sad. "I was jealous of her my whole life, and when our mother got sick, I left because I could not stand to watch her die, and I could not stand to see Maya being strong while I was weak." The gear mechanism turned again, and Marcus bit down on his tongue to stop himself from screaming, and tasted blood and copper and regret. "I told Maya I hated her before I left, and those were the last words I ever said to her, and now I am going to die without ever telling her I was sorry." The drone's eye blinked, and for a moment, Marcus could swear he saw something like understanding in that simple blue light. "Are you recording this?" he asked Kappa. "Are you keeping track of everything I say?" The drone made a sound that was almost like a chirp, and a small green light flickered on next to its eye. "Good," Marcus said with a weak smile. "At least someone will remember that I existed, even if it is just a broken survey drone with a damaged brain." 3 kilometers above in the main colony complex, the Valorian rescue coordinator clicked its mandibles together and studied the data on its screen. The Valorians were tall insectoid beings, with 6 legs and 4 arms, and compound eyes that saw the universe in mathematical patterns and probability calculations. Coordinator Vex-12 had been assigned to Helix 9 for 7 standard years, and in that time it had learned many things about the strange soft creatures called humans. But understanding them was still beyond its capabilities. The collapse in Processing Sector 7 has been confirmed, said one of its subordinates. Structural damage is extensive, and there is a 93% chance of secondary collapses within the next 48 hours. Vex-12 processed this information and ran it through its decision matrix. Were there any workers in that sector when the seismic event occurred? One human engineer named Marcus Chen was logged as entering the sector 6 hours before the collapse, and he has not been logged as leaving. Vex-12 clicked its mandibles again and pulled up the human's file. Marcus Chen was 34 years old and had worked on Helix 9 for 3 years, and his performance reviews were adequate but not exceptional. What is the probability that this human survived the initial collapse? Less than 4%, Coordinator. And the probability that he can survive long enough for a rescue team to reach him? Less than 0.1%, Coordinator. Made its decision in less than a second, because that was how Valorians operated. A rescue mission would require 6 workers, and 3 drilling units, and approximately 18 hours of labor, and the cost would be significant. Yes, Coordinator. And the probability of success is essentially 0. Correct, Coordinator. Then we will not waste resources on a recovery that cannot succeed, and we will mark the human as deceased and notify his emergency contacts. The subordinate hesitated, which was unusual for a Valorian. Coordinator, if I may observe, the humans may not accept this decision, and they may demand that we attempt a rescue, regardless of the probability of success. Vex-12 turned its compound eyes toward its subordinate, and studied the younger Valorian, with something that might have been annoyance. The humans demand many things that do not make logical sense, and they often waste resources on endeavors that have no reasonable chance of success, and this is why their species is considered inefficient by the consortium. But Coordinator, they have been known to succeed in situations where our calculations predicted failure. A statistical anomaly that does not justify changing our protocols. Vex-12 returned to its screen and began composing the death notification for Marcus Chen's file. Deep below in the darkness, Marcus had no idea that he had already been declared dead. He was too busy trying to stay alive. The temperature had dropped further, and he had torn strips from his uniform to wrap around his exposed skin. He had discovered that if he pressed his body against one of the hot hydraulic pipes, he could stay warm enough to survive. You know what I learned in engineering school? He said to Kappa. I learned that machines do not care about humans, and they do not hate us, and they do not love us, and they just do what they are programmed to do. Around at the massive gears and pistons that surrounded him. But I also learned that humans built these machines, and that means we can understand them. And if we can understand them, we can control them. He reached out with his free hand and touched the conveyor belt that pinned his legs. You are not my enemy, he said to the machine. You are just a tool, and I am going to figure out how to use you. The drone whirred, and its green recording light continued to blink. Marcus Chen was not ready to die yet, and he was about to show the universe why humans were not as fragile as they appeared. By the second day, Marcus had stopped thinking about rescue and started thinking about survival. His right arm was useless now because the gear mechanism had torn through muscle and tendon, and the limb hung limp and bloody at his side. But his left arm still worked, and his brain still worked, and that was enough. Okay, Kappa, he said to the drone that watched him with its unblinking blue eye. Let me explain what I'm going to do. The drone whirred, and its green recording light blinked steadily. This entire sector is automated, which means everything runs on power and data, and if I can tap into those systems, I might be able to do something useful. He reached out and grabbed a bundle of cables that hung from a broken junction box above his head. These are fiber optic lines that carry information between the processing units and the main control center, and if I can splice into them, I can send a signal. He forced them to work, and he stripped the protective coating from the cables and exposed the delicate glass fibers inside. The problem is that I do not have a transmitter, and my communicator is dead, and the emergency beacon is smashed. Behavior? He looked at Kappa, and a slow smile spread across his cracked and bleeding face. But you have a transmitter, do you not, little friend? The drone made a sound that was almost like a question. You are a survey drone, which means you were designed to send geological data back to the research station, and even though your legs are broken, your communications array should still work. Marcus pulled himself closer to Kappa, and the effort sent waves of agony through his shattered legs, but he did not stop. I am going to connect you to the main data network, and then I am going to use you to send a message. It took him 3 hours to complete the splice, because his hands kept shaking, and he had to stop every few minutes to rest and gather his strength. But finally the connection was made, and Kappa's eye flickered and changed from blue to green, and then to a bright pulsing white. "Hello, beautiful," Marcus whispered. "Welcome to the network." The drone began receiving data from all over processing Sector 7, and Marcus watched as streams of information scrolled across its damaged display screen. Now I just need to figure out how to send a message that someone will notice. Processing systems in Sector 7 reported their status to the main control center every 30 seconds, and the reports included data about ore quality and equipment performance and power consumption. Marcus began manipulating the data. He changed the power consumption numbers in a pattern that spelled out a simple message in Morse code. Short pulse for dot and long pulse for dash, and the words repeated over and over again. "Still here, still here, still here." "It is not much," he said to Kappa, "but maybe someone will notice, and maybe someone will understand." He leaned back against the hot hydraulic pipe and closed his eyes and tried to ignore the fever that was building in his body. The infection in his arm was spreading, and he knew that without medical treatment, he would die within the next 2 days. But he was not ready to give up yet. "Let me tell you something about humans," he said to Kappa as the drone recorded his words. "The strongest species in the galaxy, and we are not the smartest, and we are not the most advanced." He opened his eyes and looked at the machines that surrounded him. "But we are the most stubborn, and we are the most creative, and we refuse to accept that anything is impossible." The gear mechanism that had destroyed his arm turned again, and Marcus felt nothing, because the nerves were dead now. The Valorians look at a situation like this, and they calculate the odds, and they decide that rescue is not worth the effort, because the probability of success is too low. He smiled, and there was something fierce and defiant in that smile. But humans do not think that way, and we do not care about probability, and we do not accept that our friends and family are expendable resources to be written off when the numbers do not add up. He pulled himself closer to Kappa and began working on the next phase of his plan. "I am going to map this entire sector from memory, and I am going to figure out the safest path for a rescue team to reach me, and I am going to encode that information into the data stream." His fingers moved across Kappa's interface panel, and he began entering coordinates and structural data and warnings about unstable areas. "Even if I die before they get here, I am going to make sure that someone knows exactly how to find me and exactly how to get out safely." 3 kilometers above, Yuki Tanaka was working late in the data analysis center when she noticed something strange. She was 26 years old, and she had been on Helix 9 for only 8 months, and she was still learning how everything worked. But she knew that the power consumption data from Sector 7 should not be fluctuating in such a regular pattern. "What is this?" she said to herself as she pulled up the raw data on her screen. Short pulse, long pulse, long pulse, short pulse. The pattern repeated over and over again. Frowned and leaned closer to her monitor, and tried to remember something her grandfather had taught her when she was a child. That is Morse code, she whispered with sudden understanding. Someone is sending Morse code through the power grid. She grabbed a piece of paper and began translating the message. Still here, still here, still here. Oh my God, she said as tears began to form in her eyes. Someone is alive down there, and they are trying to tell us. Yuki jumped up from her chair and ran toward the command center. She did not know if anyone would believe her, but she was going to make them listen. Yuki burst into the command center, with her papers clutched in her hand and her heart pounding in her chest. Someone is alive in Sector 7, she shouted. I found a message in the data, and someone is sending signals through the power grid. The room fell silent, and everyone turned to look at her. Coordinator Vex 12 rose from its seat and clicked its mandibles in a pattern that suggested irritation. Engineer Tanaka, you are interrupting important work, and your claims are not consistent with our assessment of the situation. But look at this. Yuki held up her papers. This is Morse code, and it says still here over and over again, and someone down there is trying to tell us they survived. The Valorian took the papers and examined them with its compound eyes, and then set them aside with a dismissive gesture. This pattern could be caused by equipment malfunction or data corruption, and there is no reason to assume it is a deliberate signal from a survivor. But the probability of this exact pattern occurring by accident is almost zero, and the probability of a human surviving the collapse and then managing to send coded messages through damaged equipment is equally small. Yuki felt her face grow hot with anger. You already decided he was dead before you even looked, and you are not willing to consider any evidence that contradicts your conclusion. The other humans in the room shifted uncomfortably, but none of them spoke up. They all knew that arguing with the Valorians was usually pointless, because the insectoid beings did not change their minds once a decision had been made. Engineer Tanaka, your emotional attachment to this situation is affecting your judgment, and I recommend that you return to your duties and allow the command staff to handle this matter. Yuki wanted to scream, but she forced herself to stay calm. Fine, she said through gritted teeth. I understand. Your position. She turned and walked out of the command center, but she had no intention of giving up. In the corridor outside, she found 3 other humans waiting for her. There was Jin, a big man from the mining division, who had arms like tree trunks and a heart full of courage. There was Sarah, a medical technician with steady hands and a stubborn streak that matched Yuki's own. And there was Pavel, an old engineer who had worked on Helix 9 longer than anyone else, and who knew the tunnels better than he knew his own face. We heard what you said in there, Jin said quietly, and we believe you. The Valorians are not going to help, Yuki replied. They have already written him off as dead. Pavel stepped forward, and his weathered face was set with determination. Then we go without them, and we bring our friend home ourselves, he said. Sarah nodded and checked the medical kit on her belt. I have enough supplies to stabilize one, she said. Critically injured patient, and if we move fast, we might be able to reach him in time. Yuki felt tears of gratitude sting her eyes. Thank you, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Do not thank us yet, Jin said with a grim smile. We still have to get past 3 kilometers of collapsed tunnels and unstable rock. They gathered their equipment in secret, and they waited until the night shift, when the Valorians were less attentive, and then they slipped into the maintenance tunnels that led down to the lower levels. The going was slow and dangerous, because the earthquake had damaged many of the support structures, and they had to crawl through gaps and climb over debris and squeeze through spaces that were barely wide enough for a human body. But they kept moving, because they knew that somewhere below them a man was fighting for his life. Deep in the darkness of Sector 7, Marcus was growing weaker. The fever had taken hold of him, and he drifted in and out of consciousness. And sometimes he talked to Kappa, and sometimes he talked to people who were not there. "Maya," he whispered. "Is that you, Maya? I am so sorry for what I said, and I did not mean it, and I was just scared and stupid." But Maya was not there, and the only answer was the endless grinding of machines. His message was still transmitting, and he had added the rescue route to the data stream, and he hoped that someone somewhere was paying attention. "Kappa," he said to the drone, "if I do not make it, I need you to keep recording, and I need you to keep sending, and I need you to tell everyone what happened here." The drone whirred, and its eyes seemed to glow brighter, as if it understood the importance of its mission. "Tell them that I did not give up, and tell them that I fought until the very end, and tell them that being human means never accepting defeat, even when the odds are against you." He coughed, and blood splattered across his chest, and he knew that his time was running out. The Valorians think we are weak, because we make decisions based on emotion instead of logic, but they do not understand that our emotions are what make us strong. He reached out and touched Kappa's battered metal shell. "Love is not logical, and hope is not logical, and courage is not logical, but they are the things that drive us to do impossible things." Somewhere above him in the tunnels, Yuki was studying her tablet and watching the data stream from Sector 7. "He is sending coordinates," she said with wonder in her voice. "He has mapped out a safe path for us to follow." Jin looked over her shoulder and shook his head in amazement. The man is dying, and he is still thinking about how to help the people who are coming to save him. Pavel wiped tears from his eyes. That is what humans do, and that is who we are. They followed Marcus's breadcrumbs through the collapsed tunnels, and every step brought them closer to their trapped friend. And in the darkness below, Marcus heard something that made his heart leap with sudden hope. Sound of voices. Human voices, calling his name. Marcus heard his name echoing through the darkness, and for a moment he thought he was dreaming again. "Marcus Chen," the voice called out. "If you can hear us, make some noise." He tried to shout, but his throat was too dry, and all that came out was a weak croak. So he grabbed a piece of broken metal and banged it against the hydraulic pipe next to him. Clang, clang, clang. The sound rang through the tunnels like a bell. "We hear you," another voice shouted. "We are coming, and just hold on a little longer." Marcus felt tears running down his face, and he did not try to stop them. 67 hours after the collapse, the rescue team broke through the final barrier of debris, and Yuki Tanaka crawled into the small space where Marcus lay trapped. "Oh God," she whispered when she saw the state of him. "Sarah, get in here now and bring everything you have." Marcus looked up at her, with eyes that were clouded with fever, but still burning with determination. "Life. You got my message," he said with a smile that was both triumphant and exhausted. "Every word of it, and you saved our lives with that route you mapped out." Jin and Pavel squeezed in behind Yuki, and they immediately began working to free Marcus from the machinery that had held him prisoner for nearly 3 days. The conveyor assembly was too heavy to lift, but Pavel knew a trick with hydraulic jacks, and within an hour they had raised it enough to pull Marcus free. His legs were shattered, and his right arm was beyond saving, but he was alive. Sarah worked frantically to stabilize him, and she pumped him full of antibiotics and painkillers and fluids, and she wrapped his wounds in clean bandages, and she never stopped telling him that everything was going to be okay. "The drone," Marcus said weakly, "do not leave Kappa behind." Jin looked at the battered survey unit with its single blue eye. "You want us to bring this piece of junk?" "That piece of junk saved my life, and it has a recording of everything that happened, and it is important." Jin shrugged and tucked Kappa under his arm, and they began the long journey back to the surface. Word of the unauthorized rescue mission had spread through the colony, and when the team emerged from the tunnels, they found a crowd of humans waiting for them. Someone started clapping, and then everyone was clapping and cheering, and Marcus was lifted onto a stretcher and carried to the medical center like a conquering hero. The Valorians watched from a distance, and Coordinator Vex 12 observed the celebration with confusion in its compound eyes. "I do not understand," it said to one of its subordinates. "The probability of success was negligible, and yet they succeeded." "That's it? Perhaps our calculations were incomplete, Coordinator." Vex 12 considered this possibility, and for the first time in its career, it felt something that might have been uncertainty. The recovery was long and painful, and there were times when Marcus wanted to give up. His right arm had to be amputated and replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic that was stronger than flesh, but felt cold and foreign against his skin. His legs required extensive reconstruction, and the doctors filled his bones with metal supports and wrapped his muscles in synthetic fibers that would help him walk again. He spent 3 months in rehabilitation, and every day was a battle against despair. But he was not alone. Yuki visited him every afternoon, and she brought him books and movies and news from the colony, and she never let him feel sorry for himself for too long. Jin and Pavel and Sarah took turns sitting with him during the long nights, and they told him stories and played cards with him and reminded him that he had people who cared about him. And one day, a message arrived from Earth. It was from Maya. Message said, "I heard what happened to you, and I am so proud of you. And I forgive you for everything you said, and I was never angry with you, and I just want my brother back." Marcus read the message 100 times, and each time he felt a little more whole. When he was finally released from the medical center, he walked out on his own 2 legs, and he held his cybernetic arm up to the light and watched the metal fingers flex and move. A journalist from the colony news service was waiting for him. "Mr. Chen, you have become something of a legend around here, and people are calling you the man who refused to die." Marcus laughed and shook his head. "I did not refuse to die, and I just refused to stop trying. Is it true that you merged with the machinery that trapped you? That you became part of the system in order to survive?" Marcus thought about this question for a long moment. "I suppose that is one way to look at it. And I used the machines to send my message, and I used them to stay warm, and I used them to guide my rescuers." He looked down at his metal arm and his reinforced legs. "And now I am part machine myself, and I have processors in my brain that help me control my prosthetics, and I have sensors in my skin that let me feel things I never could before." The journalist leaned closer. "Do you regret what happened to you?" "I said something when I was trapped down there, and I said I would be like this forever. And I thought I was talking about being stuck, and being helpless, and being alone." Marcus smiled, and there was no bitterness in that smile. "But I was right, and I will be like this forever, and I mean the new me, and the me that knows how strong humans can be, and the me that has friends who risked everything to save me." He turned and looked at Yuki, who was standing nearby with tears in her eyes. "I used to think I wanted to be special, but I did not understand what that meant, and being special is not about being better than everyone else." He walked over to Yuki and took her hand. "Being special is about being connected to others, and being part of something bigger than yourself, and knowing that you would do anything for the people you love." 6 months later, Marcus Chen returned to Helix 9 as the new director of emergency response. The Valorians had studied his case extensively, and they had begun a new research program to understand what they called human irrational persistence. They still did not fully understand it, but they had learned to respect it. On his first day in his new office, Marcus sat down at his desk and looked at the small survey drone that sat on the shelf beside him. Kappa's eye glowed blue, and its recording. Light blinked green, and it watched over Marcus, just as it had watched over him in the darkness. "Well, old friend," Marcus said to the drone, "we made it." The drone whirred softly, as if in agreement. Outside his window, Marcus could see the stars stretching out into infinity, and he knew that somewhere out there, other humans were facing impossible odds and refusing to give up. That was what it meant to be human. Not the strength of their bodies or the power of their technology, but the fire in their hearts that no amount of darkness could extinguish. Marcus smiled and got to work. There were lives to save, and he was not going to waste a single moment, because he knew better than anyone that hope was the most powerful force in the universe, and as long as humans existed, that force would never die.